Good to go.
Welcome, everyone. This is the December 8th meeting of the OPDC Audit Committee. I think everyone has the agenda, and I believe we're all already acquainted with everyone, so I don't think introductions are necessary. The agenda for this meeting includes nomination and election of a new chair. I've scheduled nominations at the beginning of the meeting, and without knowing whether we might have multiple nominations, I scheduled the election, the vote for a new chair at the end, so that if necessary, we could allow time for candidates to speak to the committee, and for folks to consider how they might vote. The new chair will take office after this meeting. I'll chair this one since I prepared the agenda with Scott, and that's how we'll proceed on that. I don't have any other announcements, so let's open the floor for nominations for chair of the audit committee. To clarify, the charter of the committee requires that the chair be one of the public members of the committee.
External.
With that said, let's open the nominations.
This is Scott. I'll nominate Jacqueline Moore.
This is Reed. I'll second.
Thank you. Any other nominations? All right. In that case, we'll close the nominations with a single nominee, and it should make being at the end pretty straightforward. Thank you. Let's move on to management update. Ralph and Kim. Who'd like to go first?
Ralph, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Go ahead.
Well, just for full transparency, I'm just back from vacation, so I'm still digging myself out from emails. And Scott, I saw your email for the one update, which if you want me to do that today or just shoot you an email, just let me know. Happy to do that.
Okay.
Well, let's see, from the compliance audit and performance, I think most everyone knows contracts have been out. We're working through all of those issues. Really, there aren't any issues, but we've got all the contracts out. The hourly agreements are out. We're working the data and research team with our IT team to make sure we can get some updates to our internal databases to ensure that we can report out all the information that is needed. We are working on key performance measures. We did have a presentation that was to go to the commission on Friday, but my understanding is due to some timing constraints that the presentation was not given on key performance measures. And I believe everyone here knows that agencies are required to have key performance measures. So we're looking at the new one that the legislature proposed to us for 2026, and then for the 27-29 biennium, we've added additional ones as well. So there'll be more of that information forthcoming. We will be presenting all of our KPMs to the short session next year, early next year, and then fully implementing them if they're all approved for the 27-29 biennium. And all of the new KPMs are tied to our strategic plan. So we can have a measure of our strategic plan to key performance measures that we have alignment with. And so it's around accounts payable processing time, our pre-authorized expense processing time. We have a new one around contract management, one around policies, procedures, and standards within the agency. I'm going off the top of my head. And then we have the new one around for the 26 is around persons who are financially eligible for a public defender, which relates to the unrepresented persons list. So the goal is to have no one on the unrepresented list. So lots of work within the agency on that. We have a new person starting on the data team next week. We've had some transition within the data and research team. One person left, and then Charity, who has been part of the quality control, quality assurance role, has been promoted to one of our senior research analysts. So we have a new senior research analyst starting next week, and then we'll be posting the position to fill Charity's promotion to the senior research analyst. Gosh, there's probably a bunch more information to share, but that's what I can gather off the top of my head, and still I'm burying myself through probably several emails that I need to get through. So I'm going to defer to Ralph.
Ralph?
Good afternoon, Ralph Amador, Chief Financial Officer for the Commission. So over the last few months, we've gone through a lot of transitions. For those who don't know and don't understand, the state is at a deficit with budget. So we were engaged in first round of governor cuts, where the agency had over $1 million that it had to give in administrative cuts. And then we went to a 5% reduction from the legislative fiscal office, where we had to put up our 5% is like 30 something $1 million or some crazy amount for reductions for the legislature to consider. So we put forth a bunch of draconian type cuts forward to reducing positions, reducing services. Again, for those who are unaware, our agency is about 94% pass through, meaning that 94% of all of our money goes straight out the door. And about 5 to 6% stays inside. A good portion of that is our FCMS project, which is about $14 million. So we don't have a lot to cut. But we gave up some position authority. For one time, we gave up savings. We gave up anywhere we could find some sort of reduction. We're cutting training in just about everywhere out there. So, I mean, when you don't have a lot of SNS, you don't have a lot of staff, you have to cut things like training, travel. The governor put a mandate out. There's no in-state travel, no out-of-state travel. In-state travel is monitored heavily. So we every division in the agency undertook how they're going to save at least 5% of their budget going forward. And again, that equates to mainly just staff and whatever SNS we can do. In order to not cut staff, we took cuts to training, personal services, office supplies, and stuff like that to try and knock down anything we could get at that point. Again, all that stuff was turned into the legislative fiscal office sometime in November, and for consideration in the short session. There was another revenue forecast that came out that painted a little bit of a rosier picture, not as dreary, but still that doesn't have the effect. We still don't know the effects of House Bill 1 at the federal level, which again is supposed to cut about $15 billion worth of state funds over the next 10 years. And when we don't have state fund, when we have federal funds, we have to fund with state dollars. And again, it becomes an issue of who has what and what's going to be and where we fall on the ladder as far as general fund investments. So again, things to consider, things that we're going forward, what we can do, what we can't do. We're beginning to consider our budget for 27-29 at this point, but it looks like with the reduction budget now and a reduction budget the next couple of things, there may not be any programs that we're going to be adding. So normally we go and talk about policy option packages, which are policy option package is a new program or a major change to a program that's not in your current budget. We're not going to have a lot of room to do that. Last time it was 1% of your budget was the threshold, which for us is like $5 million. We really can't do anything for $5 million given the cost of everything. So a lot to be said about what's going to happen over the next 6-8 months as we go into our budgeting process. We've spent the last couple of weeks putting together some asks and some changes for the short session. We have some things that we're going to try and move staff around, restructuring our compliance audit performance unit and moving some things around there. That's all in the works. It'll be something that should get put forward in the legislative session. We have a couple things, we have a series of reports that are due for the January session, January interim ways and means, and for the February session. So we've been working as an agency to put those things together for the legislature. Those are all in our budget bill 5031 from 2025. Our FCMS project is moving along. We're in the negotiation phase to award with a contractor. We have an intent to award out, and we're in negotiation phases to try and get something signed and then get to fit gap. The proposer, we're hoping to get things underway in the next few months so that we can get hopefully a system up and around in the next year. Again, those are all, I'm very muffled on what I can't say because we're in a negotiation phase. So I can say we're negotiating with a vendor, and that's about all I'm going to tell you because everything else is under wraps at this time. The AP people are again, our accounts payable people are staying around 40 days. There's that's from the vendor's perspective, that's too much. But we lost a position in our accounts payable area, so we're doing more with less. Our invoices, we had invoice submission high of about 5,100 invoices for the month of October. We're up around 30-40% over the last couple of years. So our increase in invoices and payments has gone up tremendously, and we've grown 2 staff over the last couple of years, which is not enough to keep up pace. The agency just over the last month got moved on from having limited duration positions that we carried forward from the last biennium. Those positions that didn't get funded were eliminated. And so we have everybody in their permanent positions as at this point. We had a series of bumping and such that was unpleasant, but it's something that we had to go through as an agency. All of the, as Kim said, all the majority of the contracts are done. All of our capacity contracts are all signed and out and operating. We're going through our second round of completing our allotment for the first quarter of the 26th year. So that's from January through March. So we're making some contract amendments right now so we can, what that means is that when the agency was in the judicial branch, we had one appropriation where we got all of our money appropriated to us and we could spend as we needed to. Now that we're in the executive branch, we're under an allotment process, which means that we get money appropriated, but DAS holds onto that money and it gives us authority to spend on a quarterly basis, so that we can only spend on a quarterly basis. So that means we have to really watch on how we're increasing capacity and changing things around, because we have to manage quarter by quarter through the rest of it. And that's the way the executive branch, all executive branch agencies are like that. But we're not. Judicial branch doesn't operate that way. So it's a change for us, a change for our vendors, and just it's a different type of accountability. The commission chair held her last meeting on Friday. So we have a new commission chair, and he's sitting in this area right now. Mr. Harris is our new OPDC commission chair. Vice Chair Vandenberg was maintained as the vice chair. So we're looking forward to continuing the good work that they're doing as we go forward. I think that's about it for what's happening now that I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Ralph. Any questions for either Ralph or Kim.
None from me.
I
Yeah,
have
for me
a
either.
couple of questions. And this is for my information because I am not familiar with all of the terminology. I guess for Ralph and Kim, when you say the contracts are out, do you mean that they are out, signed, returned, and then people are doing work under the contracts, or that they're just been released from the agency for agreement?
Executed, sir.
Yep.
Okay.
Capacity
And that,
contracts are executed, yes.
and does that include all of the hourly vendors?
No, it does not.
Do you know how many are out and not executed with hourly vendors? Is that a
I don't know that
substantial
off the top of my head. We
portion?
can get back to you on that. I'm not sure of the exact number of how many hourly contracts were signed. I know there was a group of hourly contractors who did not like the contract and were pushing back against it. And that's again, I'm not sure where that sits at number wise, but I know that they're in some talks about it. Yeah, I
Do you
don't
know
know.
if do you know if those vendors are like in a crisis county, or like if that's going to cause any additional stress on the unrepresented
I
list?
believe so. I believe it's all over. So it's gonna inevitably it will cause stress on the unrepresented at some point. But the capacity contracts did are picking up a lot of the what's out there. I mean, 'cause you've been around, capacity
Yeah.
contractors get first swap of everything that's out there. As long as where we're going, people are getting up to 90% capacity. Kim can call me a liar if I'm a liar, but they're trying to get everybody up to 90% capacity. That's what we were told by the legislature. Get the contracts to 90%, and folks are really stepping up and making that happen on the capacity contract side. That's the consortiums and the law firms and the not-for-profits. So
Do you or Kim know if that those folks not signing the new for the next biennium have if that's resulted in people withdrawing off of cases that they are currently representing people on?
I don't know that. Kim may know that.
I don't read. I
Thanks.
haven't heard that those who have not signed an hourly agreement where their cases are, like I've not heard a crisis around that. That's not to say that it hasn't been averted and worked out potentially, but I'm happy to do some checking and we can definitely get the information back to Scott to get shared back out with everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Reed. Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to the next item, which is the audit plan. Scott?
Oh, okay. So I think to explain the audit plan, one needs to back up a little bit and look at the risk assessment. So this year I did a more inclusive risk assessment. It involved surveying 28 folks from or folks from 28 different functional areas. And that gave us scores from 1 to 10 based on frequency and impact. So any score that was a 7 or higher was deemed for inclusion in that area, just given some variability in how people score their own risk concerns. So all these risks came from people that work at the line level. Also, management had their input. And for reference, it's in the meeting materials, but the risk survey is attached so you can see what was asked and all the different functional areas included. That also included a provider area. So it was external customer as well as internal folks that do the work. So you'll have that survey for reference. The functional representation shows which response number came from which functional area. So you can see if you see a comment or a score, you can determine where that came from. And also the interim executive director's interventions, those are listed item by item on one of the exhibits in the meeting materials. But the two that are really here that give us the most insight, there's one that lists and I'll bring it up on the screen here in just a moment, that the priorities that were 7 or higher, and these all have scores that I'll show you. And the other reference is called the high level risk comment. And I think in the materials you see it as a column. And that just shows a distribution of the highest concerns people had, the frequency of those concerns as they're related to specific categories like strategic planning, reputation, staffing, that kind of thing. So that's used to sort of give you a guide, but understand those are perceptions of staff, but that is there for reference. And that was used to inform the priorities as well as the executive director when I met with him and talked with him about all the risks. He has comments that were shared that also help prioritize the audit, the risks to be put into an audit. So I think it might be easier for me then to just share the screen real fast. I'm going to pull that up. Here we go. And it is going to be this one. No, just a second. Okay, hold on. Stop sharing. Got to find the document real quick. Okay, can everybody see this document?
Yes.
Okay,
I can see it. You just might want to make it bigger because it's very, very tiny.
thank you for that. I'm going to scroll out a little bit here. Is this open?
Yes.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so what you see here, and I'm just going to pan this real quick, so just kind of avert your eyes for a little bit. But as we go, it starts off with the governance function. And as we scroll down, we get into different functional areas. This one has to do with government relations, communication, etc. So on the column C here, it talks about the risk that was identified by the respondent. In this case, it says no definition of the CAP team. Another one says volatility, reactionary strategic direction, that kind of thing. And so then a scope for each of those insights was drafted by myself, an estimate of how long that would take, long or short. Short would be under 6 months, long would be up to a year, and then my recommendation. This one is not a top priority. It's just simply that's one that I would recommend. Okay. And that's how this was built out as we go through each of these, those that had a higher score. And I can pull that real quick. Let's just open that up. Because then you can see the scoring a little bit. So if we go here and there, that gives you a relative score. So again, these scores came about by the frequency that the respondent thought this would happen and how often it would occur. And then what the impact was, they're basically weighted, multiplied together to get a score. So one of these then has to do with strategic planning. I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit. Task and role definition for operations. And I'm recommending that one as a consulting engagement. Strategic planning again. This is part of the first one. That's why the number is 1 is the same. It shares that same strategic planning concern, that risk. And I'm assuming everybody's looked through this and has had a chance to look at the risks identified in the scope. But these are the ones that I'm highlighting that I put into the audit plan, which I'll show next. This again is strategic planning. Roles and responsibilities of the ASD unit. That was a third one. And also in this column P, you can see generally when the audit could take place. If it says 26, 27, it's because there's things now being implemented that we want to wait a little bit before we take a look at what those are. So part of this task was identifying what can we do right now and what can wait. This one has to do with policy development, making sure that there's resources there before a policy is implemented. This has to do with the state trial offices. So as I just mentioned, what can we do now versus what can we do later? This one came to the fore with some higher marks. This is something we could get to pretty quick to evaluate the performance of the state trial offices, the criteria used to set them up, their caseloads, their performance, that kind of thing, what was planned, what was actual. So that is one that I've put up early in the audit plan. Evaluating controls and service provider quality. That's another one where we're looking at what kind of quality are we getting from the service providers that support the public defenders. That was 6. I'm going to scan past that one because that was already sort of categorized. Need for transparency in service request approval and denials. This comes largely from the PAE and AP audit I just did, where there were some areas where the criteria to be applied for approvals was not clear. So I thought this would be something that would be worth adding. That came up as an identified risk. And at least 2 respondents here because those are the 7s. And then we're looking at the need for improved oversight of service providers within the formal agreement, having to do more with the fraud focused. So that's number 6, the potential for fraud. And external provider contracting. This is something at a high mark, a 10. Again, those are pretty subjective based on the respondent. But contracting we know has been an issue recently. This audit would focus on the contract management, not the contract substance. So it would go back a number of years to now to look at the tools that we have, the controls we have in place for the whole contracting process. And that is going to be one that I recommend that we do out of the gate starting in January to get a focus on our contract management practices. And then this last one, category number 9, is data policies regarding data governance, data handling, that kind of thing. DCBS just did a audit on that and found it really insightful. And I think we may benefit from that, but it's not one we need to do right away compared to contract oversight or the performance of the trial offices. I think those 2 were more important. So now, if there's any questions, I'll go over to the audit plan, but I want to pause a moment because there's a lot here and you may have questions from the materials that you had before the meeting. Are there any questions at this juncture?
None from me.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline.
I'm curious in regard to this this last one about data policies. Is that or can you tell us whether that is something that will be addressed as a part of the FCMS contract? Will there be within that contract the development of data policies to guide that information system?
I
Ralph,
don't have that
Ralph?
information. I'll go to Ralph. Exactly.
Are you there, Ralph?
Yeah.
I was wondering, can you tell us whether the FCMS contract and the development of the FCMS will address data management policies?
I believe so.
Yeah, that I think is a good reason to wait on this audit until we see what emerges with the new FCMS. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay. No
Any other questions?
Oh. Actually, I have a question, Scott.
Yes, sir.
Just want to see in column K, the scores or the output scores. What was the data range? So is 10 a max score, or what's the maximum score a unit could get?
The most you can get is 10.
10. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just have one comment in regard to that that I'd encourage you to consider in future methodologies. And I think I would like to see the score developed from more than a single respondent's opinion. I've always found it more valuable to utilize individual respondents to identify risk areas, but then to seek a consensus score around the degree of risk. So I think it would be more meaningful in terms of identifying the degree of risk if you selected a smaller list from among the master list of issues that are identified that um, uh, that that in your auditor's judgment are significant and auditable risk areas, and then invited a larger group to score those risks on likelihood and impact. Because I think allowing a single respondent to identify something as, as a 10, without necessarily even comparing that risk to others on the list, is not it doesn't give you a very good measure of risk, in my opinion.
John,
Understood.
you make a good point. Scott and I had met just offline, talking about how other agencies differ from the judicial branch from becoming an executive branch and how we do our risk assessments. So,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, the Oregon Military Department, which is where I work as the chief audit executive and chief risk officer, I have a dual title. We use the ISO 3100 standard that is undergoing change right now for the standard committee,
Mm-hmm.
but it's updated. But we do it the impact, likelihood, and we do the residual risk. So after mitigation, and
Mm-hmm.
that even though that score and even the Secretary of State, which requires that we do this risk assessment, is a requirement for all agencies to put forth a risk assessment by their auditor. That score is always looked at as subjective. So there
Mm-hmm.
is a known that the risk owner is the one who should be giving the score. That score should always be looked at as subjective and not objective. So when we
Sure.
pick audibility, or when you look at a risk or a heat map of that risk, the agency's director should be the one to decide whether or not that score is accurate before putting forth to the Secretary of State. And that's something Scott and I have talked about, looking through the lens of the risk owner might think that it's just their biggest problem on their plate and has the biggest impact and likelihood, whereas the agency director might say, well, I see the whole picture, and it is a big risk, but the impact, it only impacts one service area, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore the impact may be high in their area but not impact the entire agency or affect that of the state. And so
Yeah.
that's where that knowledge base comes in. But Scott and I have talked about it. Doing this risk assessment is a big undertaking for a one position role and takes considerable amount of time. And so shifting to a 3100 standard is just not something that he could undertake at this time with the amount of workload that he was already working through as a one person department. So I think in the future, that's something that he'll be evaluating.
Yeah.
Is that correct, Scott? That's kind of where we
That's
landed when we talked
exactly.
about modeling it versus a judicial side going to an executive side and how they
Mm-hmm.
manage it. So.
Agreed. And again, the point was to be more inclusive than the years before. Still kind of feeling the way through this a little bit, but this is
Yeah.
good feedback, and I appreciate that. The only thing that came close to what you were thinking there was this distribution. Let's see if I can show down here there's a chart that shows the frequency,
Mm-hmm.
of, here it is, of
Yeah.
respondents, but I could refine that more. But those are crude categories. And I think bringing it back to the executive director, who did provide comment, but not on all of it. So if a smaller group were made, and then he could take a second pass at it and say, okay, of the ones you've identified, here's what I would prefer. And then, of course, internal audit has the discretion to pick an area that, in its judgment, maybe would be beneficial, but it's tempered by certainly the director and that feedback. But it is a decision made by internal audit.
Yeah. No, I understand entirely that a risk assessment is an evolving area, and it's a real challenge for a one person agency. It can consume an inordinate amount of time.
we always say, John, that the public's acceptance of risk tolerance is zero, that we would have
Right.
no risk and that we would mitigate to 100% because we are entrusted with public funds. We are public servants. Unfortunately, with the resources that we have on hand, it's not always possible to mitigate 100%. And sometimes agencies have to be mindful of that risk impact. And that's where that audit keynote comes in, is making sure that we are meeting those internal controls and mitigation standards to actually reduce the impact and likelihood for the agency. So,
Thank you, Jacqueline. Any other comments or questions?
I just have one in reference to the data policies waiting until FCMS. I just want everyone to know that we are working on with IT, the data team. The policy team is working with our IT team on policies and security levels. I think we're really, and then our data governance section of the IT division. I hope I said all that right. They are working with Infotech, and so they have a data governance work group. So there's a lot of work happening around data governance and policy work and security levels and defining all that. So I just didn't want anyone to assume that we're not doing anything and we're waiting for FCMS. There's like a lot of work that's happening currently, which I am assuming will just continue as we move into the FCMS system and, taking everything we've learned along the way and implementing it and others, right? But there is a lot of work that has been happening, lots of work, internal work groups. So there's lots happening and really, really good work in identifying areas on both sides, from the data side and also the IT side. And we're lucky to have some very talented and skilled people on both sides working together in a lot of really good collaboration. So I just wanted to make sure that was noted.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate that. I do want to point out that one thing I did reference in looking at a data governance audit is the DAMA. This is the Data Administration Management Association, and their DMBOK, which is like a PMBOK, but this is about data management. The audit that was done by DCBS included that and had a lot of value they found in that reference manual in structuring their audit and evaluating their organization. So I would encourage referencing that. If there could be any value in just taking that back to what you're doing now, I hope that would be helpful.
Perfect. I'm happy to share that.
Okay.
I
Any other
just had one
questions?
last comment. As you will see, like that Scott's position is rather new and the agency is rather new, that this is going to have a maturity link. So first, this risk assessment is going to look like everything is on fire, right? Everything is a 10, everything is thing. But that's because when you start talking about risk and developing a risk register with the limited resources that you guys have for time being the biggest one, you're going to talk about your biggest fires. And as you age and maturity and time goes on, you're going to dig deeper to the risk that's already being completely mitigated and is not really something you think about. So you're going to start to see the lower score output. But that when you first develop a risk assessment, you're always going to just talk about the things that you think are on fire, and you're not going to notice the things that are all managed and happy and good, because you're only focused on the things that are big, like you're executing your new system and your data management and the things that are your main mission. So as time goes on, you'll start to see it develop more into the lower risk areas that are being handled. And that's just maturity of, completing a risk assessment.
It's like a Pareto diagram. They all start high on the left, and you work your way down over time.
Hey, any more before we move on to the audit plan itself?
Scott, I have a real quick question. Hopefully, a lot of the notes suggest that there's a potential for I guess like a professional engagement. Um,
Yes.
and
Right.
is there a budget for that? I guess is there a budget for that, or would that
There,
something that
there
we have
is
to
in
have?
this there is in the sense that it's about the hours devoted to it, and you'll see that in the plan here in just a second. But what I intended to do, just to try to cover as much areas as I can with one position, is to have an audit. But there were some things that percolated up as concerns that I think could be addressed in a brief consulting engagement to gather information and give that to management to make some decisions and take action versus the more lengthy audit process that results in findings and recommendations. So to answer your question, the budget would be the hours devoted to that exercise, which typically were about 120 hours over 3 months. You'll see that in the spreadsheet.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go to that document now. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes,
Okay. Do I need to expand it out a little bit here?
I think it'd be a good idea, and then you could move uh, move things left if we can't
Okay.
see all of the timeline. Yeah.
All the information. Okay. So speaking to what I just mentioned, the audit that I'm recommending that we start in January is the procurement audit, which is the contract management audit. And then there's a governance, which is a consulting engagement. This relates to, hang on a second. I think I blocked off my notes. Okay, management communication. So here, when I talked with the director, he thought this would add some value. We were aware that there's some communication issues. Let's go in, do some exploratory work, find out what kind of solutions are out there, bring that back to management so they can act on that beyond anything they may have considered themselves right now. And so that's where you see the consulting engagement, no more than 40 hours a month, 120 in total, done at the same time as an audit engagement, which is going to take a lot more time. But I think that helps to provide as much value as I can in the time invested. But here's where you see the contract audit as the first one. That lasts through June. And then the trial division, these are the field offices. And this is going to take a while. Let me scroll this over, but that would begin approximately in June when the other one's ending because they overlap a little bit as you ramp up and ramp down. But the trial division would start then in June of 26 and run, I think, for about 10 months. Yeah, through April of 27. So that's one that's going to be going on for a while to assess it because there's a lot of aspects to that to look at. And while that happens, the CAP administration, there'll be a consulting engagement there to look at policy implementation. Any questions on that? Because that gets us out to April of 2027.
Scott, I had a question.
Yes, sir.
So on that trial division project, since it's pretty long in duration, I was wondering, is your thoughts to approach that as kind of like what I would call a phased audit? So maybe you issue periodic reports and then at the very end, kind of have a synopsis or overall report?
I like that a lot. And I think one thing I could have improved on this last audit is to do more of the updating, keep everybody updated. I'll just read out what I've written here as far as the areas that it'll explore. And that's location criteria, IT system support, operational costs, case types and capacity. This is planned versus actual. Administration separation of duties. This has to do with the evidence and whatnot. Even though you're in an office, you're doing different sides. For a client, you need to keep that separate. And recruiting of staff and lessons learned so far from what they knew. But each of those could be a phase, to your point, and I welcome that. That would all need to be part of the planning, structured accordingly, and then reported out. I like that.
Any other questions? I think it's appropriate for us to focus on the planned audits for 2026 because as you're aware, the risk assessment process takes place annually and can modify the priorities that are currently scheduled for 27 and 28. Um, so, those should be viewed as tentative planned audits in those years, subject to possible revision based upon the next risk assessment.
Exactly. And if I can add just to show how this works a little bit, for July here, I'm looking in column U. The total hours are 170 out of a planned 168 that gets you a little over 100%, but you have 140 for a given month. And then down here in this column or this row 16, you have time set aside for any hotline concerns, which have been rare, but at least it's sort of allocated there if that comes up. That would be something that's investigated with the agency through Secretary of State if it were to occur, and has in the past. Follow-up audit work is given some time, and then also administrative, which has to do with training and going to meetings and whatnot. So that's all added in there at about 25 hours per month, and all that rolls up to reach the 170, which is estimated to be 100% of the time available. So that's how that works.
I think you have failed to consider PTO.
You're right. I don't take any PTO. I just keep working. But point taken.
Any other questions?
Do you need a motion to approve the audit plan for 2026?
We do.
I'll motion to approve the audit plan as is in this spreadsheet for 2026.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Do we have a second?
And I'll second that.
All right. I can't see people at the moment. Can you go back to non-screen sharing so that we can see how people vote, Scott?
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the audit plan. All in favor, please indicate by the raise hand button below the look. Deanna, are you there?
I'm sorry, I'm still eating my lunch.
Okay. We're voting on the whether to approve the audit plan.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So I think that makes it unanimous. Thank you all. Thank you, Scott, for your presentation.
Thank you.
And moving on, we're doing well on our scheduling. Scott, going to report on the pre-authorized expense audit, pre-authorized PAEAP audit report.
Oh, I think you want me to go there. Okay, that's just
I'm
a brief.
Sorry. No. You're right. I skipped an item. Yeah. We need to talk about the AC charter and the committee's preference in regard to public meetings versus private meetings of this committee. For background, I've been in communication over several months with the Oregon Government Ethics Committee staff regarding the applicability of the Oregon Public Meetings Law to meetings of our committee. The Ethics Committee takes a very strict interpretation of the Oregon Public Meetings Law, and I can summarize that for you in an email that I received from from Josh Sullivan, one of the investigators there, who had pursued this question up as high as the executive director of the OGEC. And in summary, he says, we discussed this matter with the Commission's executive director and confirmed that the list that appears in OAR 199-050-0010 per N2 is exhaustive. What that means is that, and he goes on, unless the body meets the criteria set forth in one of those types of bodies, the Commission staff's interpretation of the Commission's administrative rule is that the body is a governing body. Applying that interpretation, given that the Audit Committee members are ratified by the Commission, the Audit Committee would not meet the definition of bodies advising individual public officials as defined in that section. Essentially, what he's saying is that unless a public body falls into one of three specified exceptions in the rule for exemption from the Oregon Public Meetings Law, and we can look at what those are, they consider it to be subject to the Public Meetings Law. So the three categories.
Would you like me to share those?
I think I have it. Go ahead if you have it. You can share your screen and show that to folks. Can you expand that a little, Scott, to make it a little bigger and easier to read?
Yes, I believe I can.
Oh, that's the wrong document now.
That's the 199.
No,
laws.
that looks like the charter.
Oh, okay, hold on.
I had it a minute ago, but
oh, I see. Okay, it's weird that it does that. This is what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So what we're focused on is section 2 here, because the Ethics Commission's position is that unless a body falls into 2A, 2B, or 2C, it is subject to the Public Meetings Law. Okay. Looking at this, we clearly are not merely a fact-gathering body without authority to make recommendations. Nor are we a multi-jurisdictional body. So the issue really is whether this committee fall or could be made to fall through revisions in its charter into category B, bodies advising individual public officials. Unless we can fall into that category, our meetings need to continue to be public meetings. If we were to qualify under that, we could hold private meetings. So I think the issue for this committee to consider is, what would we have to give up in order to hold private meetings, and what would we gain from being able to hold private meetings? Obviously, what we gain is the ability to discuss sensitive matters, high risk matters, threats to the agency in a private forum, without having to seek an exception to the to the public meeting requirements and qualify to hold an executive session. There are provisions in public meetings, in the public meetings law for executive sessions, which can be held in private and provide a vehicle for discussing certain matters outside of the public view. On the other hand, in order to qualify for this exemption from the public meetings law, what this committee would need to change are its status as a subcommittee of the commission, a special subcommittee of the commission. The ethics commission staff has made it clear that we cannot operate in that capacity without holding public meetings. The commission's role in ratifying membership of the audit committee, the ethics commission staff has made it clear that that would subject us to the public meeting law. Our ability to make any recommendations to the commission, which would subject us to the public meetings law. It would require that this committee either be appointed by the executive director of the agency and make recommendations only to the executive director, or that the audit committee be appointed by the CAE, that is the chief audit executive, and make recommendations only to the chief audit executive. Those are pretty severe limitations on the committee, and in my opinion, would make it impossible for this committee to achieve its primary purposes stated in its charter. And to review those for you, the purpose of the audit committee is, the purposes are that the committee provides governance and oversight of internal auditing for the commission and the commission's Office of Public, when it was originally written, Public Defense Services. The primary purpose of the committee is to enhance the quality and independence of the audit function, thereby promoting the integrity of the internal and external audit processes. The committee, in consultation with the chief audit executive and OPS executive leadership, sets the priorities of the internal audit function, promotes a strong internal control environment, and evaluates the adequacy of management's responses to risks or weaknesses identified through audit reviews or other processes, including those performed by external parties. Committee members are also involved in appraising the value of and assuring the sufficient funding of the internal audit function. The committee shares the commission's equity values, which inform the committee's decisions. So, the primary responsibilities of this committee, I believe, are to advise the chief audit executive on how to ensure that that audit functions meet professional standards, and to ensure the independence of the audit function, which I believe requires that this committee have the authority to make recommendations to both the executive director and, if necessary, the commission itself regarding actions that the committee perceives as impairing the independence of the audit function. So, I think what we would sacrifice by trying to squeeze ourselves into this exception to the public meetings law is are functions of this committee that I think are critical to achieving its purpose. And that I think is what we need to weigh against the ability to have frank and open discussions about matters which may not be or which might create a risk for the agency if discussed in public, without having to justify going into executive session. As I said, there are provisions for executive sessions under the law, which would allow us to go into executive session for certain types of discussions that would cover, I think, many of those areas, but not necessarily all areas that we might prefer to discuss privately. Having said that, I'd like to open it up to discussion and invite comments from members of the committee, particularly any of the other chief audit executives who may have experience with public meetings and executive sessions, to ask them to share their views. So it's open for discussion.
So I raise my hand.
When I see your hand, yes.
I am of the opinion the audit committee for the agency should be directing the chief audit executive's workload and reviewing their audits, looking at the work that they do for quality assurance, and then reviewing agency risk and having deep discussions about whether that risk is impacting enough that it needs to have an audit or a consulting engagement, which is now referred to in the standards as an advisory engagement. So my opinion is that the audit committee's purpose should never be to report to the commission itself, but to the chief audit executive. That's where you should have two charters. Most agencies have two charters. They have a charter for their audit committee and they have a charter for their internal audit function. And that internal audit function charter says that the chief audit executive has direct access to the board or to the agency director or even to DAS themselves to go above whenever the agency has an audit finding that is open that management has ignored, or a risk that has a high likelihood and impact that has not yet been mitigated, or an audit that was of concern to the public's interest that needs to be taken above when the agency has failed to act on it. And that charter should be the one that covers the chief audit executive's ability to have direct access. But the committee itself should be just functioned at directing the internal audit function's workload, and assessing that quality assurance aspect of the work. So the committee itself, for instance, in my committee is non-public. So we talk about the difference in this meeting that we have here public and the difference of my audit committee is that we get in the weeds of real risk and we have hypothetical conversations and we have open discussion about like the worst case impact and what we would do to prepare. So not necessarily like real that it's really happening, but just having the ability to talk about things that the public might be like, wait, is that really going to happen? Are we really going to have lack of resources? Not necessarily true, but it allows for tabletop exercising of risk and impact without, I would say, public fear mongering. I wouldn't, and to protect the public from that ability to have that fear in that regard. keep in mind that all of our audits for agencies are public record.
Yes.
And all of our risk assessments that are turned into Secretary of State are also public record. In any of the notes or minutes from audit committees can be requested for public record as well. And so whenever there's discussion in hand, it's very transparent. But the audit committee itself, from my instance, is just to direct and to offer that quality assurance of managing the audit function internally and making sure that there's no conflicts, that there's not a lack of independence, and that any advisory engagement or any audit doesn't conflict with the next audit being approved. The intent is not to have them have a direct line access to the agency director.
Mhm.
I do not have a board, so I have the agency director or DAS. Now, in the event that they needed to have a public meeting, they absolutely could call one for that intent. And that is part of my charter. So that would be my recommendation. But again, I'm not part of a commission. I'm an agency, so we don't have a board to answer to.
Yeah.
But I do think that the place of an audit committee is for the very transparent, open, honest talking about current audits and whether or not the findings actually have the work paper to support it. And when you have those discussions in open, it's hard to take back that you made a mistake as an auditor and you had an unsupported audit finding that didn't really support your work papers. Because now you have the perception to the public that there's a finding and something's wrong when really you had poor work papers or you didn't talk to the correct people. And that's what the audit committee should be for. You're reviewing an audit before it's being published. And therefore, whether or not for quality assurance, you have the actual correct amount of work papers to support your audit findings is
Mhm.
one function of the audit committee. So that's my opinion. But I leave it to you and to Reed and others to weigh in.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. As you mentioned, OPDC is I mean, not unique, but unusual in having um, uh, uh, an appointed commission that governs the agency, and the original charter for the audit committee reflects the fact that it was set up as a special committee of the commission, and therefore had an obligation to report to the commission. Um, uh, I think, I mean, maybe Rob could shed some light on whether the commission would be open to a different structure for the audit committee, other than it's being a special committee of the commission, because I don't think that there's any way to avoid a responsibility to report to the commission if it is a subcommittee of the commission, and um, and the ethics committee has made clear that as long as it functions as a subcommittee of the commission, they consider it to be a body subject to the public meetings law.
My thought then on that, not to interrupt Rob from speaking, is that why couldn't there be a audit like review committee that supports to the commission and then have the actual chief audit executive audit committee that's directing the audit work be an actual audit committee that's not part of the commission, and then you have an audit review that talks about like almost like how these meetings are currently structured, but then have an actual audit committee that is approving the work and looking at the internal controls and the quality assurance of actual audit review, because I feel like this committee is lacking that ability to do, because you can't have those discussions in open, and you'd have to call so many executive sessions. You'd have to call all the people in this room consistently. That's a lot of time. And as you saw when Scott was presenting his hours of workload, that's going to eat into that administrative workload and his ability to get his training. And of course, that eats into everyone's time here. So
Yeah.
the intent of the audit committee, I feel like with it being public, is missing a huge gap of benefit to the work of the chief audit executive, because you just cannot accomplish what you need to as a CAE in a public setting, with
Mhm.
the amount of work that it needs to be discussed for quality assurance and hypothetical situations of whether or not your audit finding is on track. So there's no reason why the commission can't have an audit review committee where they'd have these discussions in the same capacity, but not it be the actual calling it audit committee for the IIA stand. The IIA standards requires that every chief audit executive have an audit committee. So I feel like that is being missed here. Some of that standards is being missed by having it be in public, because every other agency doesn't really have a public audit committee because they're structured to follow the standards. You can't do the standards work if it's public oriented because you're missing that gap. It's hard a rock in a hard place, I would say. But yeah, I don't know why you couldn't have two lines. And
Yeah.
I'll defer to Rob and his opinion.
So thanks for that, Jacqueline. This is Rob. And I'm not an auditor, but if what I'm hearing you makes sense, is that there's the audit committee, which is this committee who would be the private directing or at least advising the CAE directly without interaction with the commissioner, maybe even the executive director. And then you would have separately, maybe set up as part of the governance of the commission and audit review committee, who would be a group of maybe 3 or 4 people, and maybe they'd meet quarterly and actually just review the product that the CAE produced, and then take that and maybe do a report to the full commission. But it would be separate, and that would be a public body because it would be a subcommittee of within the governance structure. We already sort of have something like that in place. We would just rename it the audit review committee rather than the audit charter committee or whatever it's called. And then we would separate the private work that the audit committee would do from the more public work of getting the results of the audits to the commission and have a discussion in public. Is that sort of the structure that you're talking about?
Absolutely. So the actual state audit committee for that Scott would do, that would help maintain his independence. So they would be directing, making sure that he is meeting his independence portion of the IA standards. So they're going to be making sure that he has no conflict of interest, like he's not completing an audit for work product that he did elsewhere, that his audit findings are supported by work papers, and that his audit workload is supported by his risk assessment, so that it's all aligned and that he's meeting. So every year we have to report to the JLAC, which is the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, and we have to meet the ORS standards of doing a risk-based assurance audit and those things. So making sure that he is on track to have, or the CAE, if Scott leaves and wins in the lottery, that would be great. The CAE for the organization is on track to meet his or theirs legislative requirements as well, and then that reporting. So making sure that, one, their audits are sound and they meet the standards, that their work papers matches the audit findings, the audit findings are factual based. And then also that audit committee will be looking at your risk and your risk assessment, making sure that your risk that you pick actually meets your audit standards, so that you're picking those risks. And that also just looking at scope. So your audit committee should be, hey, my scope of my audit is this. Am I missing anything? Is it objective and not subjective? Because that's the whole point of being independent, making sure that no one is influencing the auditor and saying, hey, I want you to look just at this, and then I'm going to bury that audit finding. So that's what that audit committee is for, to make sure that they remain independent.
Yeah, I think thanks. I think makes sense to me. I guess if we could develop 2 separate documents, one for the audit charter, maybe it's already developed. You just move a couple things around, and then we work on the audit review committee on the governance side as well, in conjunction with this committee, obviously. The other detail, and Scott and I talked about this a few months back. Scott, you probably have notes. I don't recall what we concluded at that point, but when the audit function slash committee slash charter was funded or established within the legislature, they had a budget note, and some of the notes indicated how they would want this to report, and some of this, even I don't recall whether it was a structural, but I remember reading that thinking, well, it looks like you're supposed to report directly to the commission. Because of the issues that we've had in the past within this agency as far as accountability, I guess, at least what the legislator thought were issues from when this got set up. So whatever we do, I want to make sure that is consistent with what those legislative budget notes indicated at the time. I don't think it's impossible to make that happen based upon sort of the structure I think we're sort of talking about right now. But Scott, if you'd at least go back and check that and make sure that there's nothing in there that would say you can't do this bifurcation thing that we're now talking about.
This is Scott. Right, I can do that for sure. We do have an internal audit charter separate from the audit committee charter. We encountered a lot of discussion about the public meeting forum. That occupied a lot of time for the audit committee charter, but the next thing to be done was the internal audit charter. So this is pretty timely, but I certainly can do that check.
David, I wonder.
And just so everyone's aware, all agencies across the board in 2025 had to redo their internal audit charter and their state audit committee charter because the IAA standards changed effective January 1st of 2025, and those standards required changes to the audit charters. And so that was an activity that all agencies are doing across the board. That's an activity that all even private entities are doing. And so this is a normal discussion just for the public's awareness of why are we talking about a charter again in the midst of already conducting meetings. It's because the charters all across the board had to be revised.
Ralph, I see your hand.
I mean, one thing, I mean, as we're looking at budget notes, just remember that budget notes do not carry the force of law. They're a budget note and a budget report. It's what the statute says is what matters. So while they do guide us and they do require reports, stuff like that, I just want to make sure that we remember that they're powerful, but they're not law powerful. I actually agree with Jacqueline on some of these things because, and having worked in a number of agencies, all of them in the executive branch, except for this one, I always seen internal audit, and my experience in internal audit was that they were there to help the agency move forward. And again, it's been used time and time again to be the canary in the coal mine, to see what's coming ahead as we're doing it, planning our actions. They're there to help and guide and do things. I think setting it up as we set it up, it hasn't been able to do that. It's reacting to things that are not allowing it to have the force and the assistance that the agency needs. I think there's a fine line between audit gotcha and audit help you. And we seem to teeter that line a lot. And again, our audit functions here are very young, immature. It is what I heard. They're not immature. I mean, in the use sense, but I mean they're not a matured function yet. The agency, as it stands, is not a matured agency. We're very mature as an agency. So I hate to see us go down the path of the internal audit not being a helpful function of the agency, and by having the ability to not, if we're public, we can't have those open conversations of that says I don't think that's right or that's wrong or go look at this. You can't have that because again, you don't want the public to get a misinterpretation of something to hear, because as I give the report out for the agency actions, I have to be very careful on what I say to not raise alarm for people to say, oh, he said there's going to be budget cuts. I'm not saying there's going to be budget cuts. There's been no action on budget cuts. The agency was supposed to give suggestions, and that's all that's happened. And again, public meeting, non-public meeting, there's a big difference between what we can have, what we can do and what we can't do. And I think that we as an agency created what we have now. And there wasn't any legislation that said you must do this or you must do that. We created the structure and everything we have now from nothing. And so then I don't know why we can't change mid-course and make some corrections as going forward. And I have to apologize because I have to leave this meeting because I have to go to another DAS meeting. So I'm sorry. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ralph. That
Thank you for your
was on
response.
par.
I agree with what Ralph said. We certainly are in a position to make changes to these charters, and and there's certainly value in being able to conduct our conversations out of public view. The point that I want to make, though, is that in order to do that, the Ethics Commission is telling us that we must fit within that category of a body which is appointed by a single public official to advise only that public official. From what Jacqueline has said, what she's advising, I think, together with what the Ethics Commission has said, would mean that we would need to restructure the Audit Committee and its charter such that the Audit Committee is appointed by the Chief Audit Executive and advises only the Chief Audit Executive, and the Internal Audit Charter would provide for the internal auditor to have unrestricted access to the executive director and to the commission. I don't think there is anything in the budget note, as I recall, that would prohibit such a structure. The budget note, I believe, required that the agency should create an internal audit function which reports directly to the commission, and I do not recall that it required that the audit committee report directly to the commission. The chief audit executive's direct access to the commission would satisfy the budget note. So it certainly is. I mean, what Jacqueline proposes is something which could be accomplished, assuming that the commission is willing to dispense with this audit committee as a subcommittee of the commission, and to and to establish its own subcommittee, which would, as Jacqueline and Rob have described, receive the products of internal audit, would have three members of the committee that kind of specialize in internal audit, digest those products and present them to the full commission, and oversee oversee management's implementation of audit recommendations, and receive reports from management and from internal audit in regard to what management has done to address identified risks. So that's all possible. Jacqueline, I see your hand again.
Yeah, one other thing, if you're going to move to that structure, The other thing that I would note, and I don't know the internal organization structure of how your CAE reports, but it's important for the IAA recommends that the CAE report administratively to the audit committee and to functionally, like, so their time, their supervisor like leave or PTO, and their performance reviews should be to the agency director.
Yeah.
And that's to prevent conflicts of interest, because if you're reporting to anybody else, like let's say the internal auditor is reporting to the CFO, there could be the perceived notion that they can't do a financial audit because they're afraid that their PTO won't be approved or their supervisory. And that's how it's viewed from the IA's perspective of independence. And so if we restructure, I don't know how Scott reports currently, but that might be something that the agency itself will want to reconsider about reporting structure of who he reports to functionally and administratively.
Yes. And that's something that would be specified in the internal audit charter, as opposed to the audit committee's charter. But I completely agree. Any other comments? Reed, see your hand.
John, given the budget note and the way that this committee was formed, is there a structure by which the audit committee is appointed by and gives advice and recommendations to the chair of the commission, who would then direct, and the audit committee would, be comprised of the same folks that it is currently comprised of, or similar people who are currently comprising the committee, and direct the chief audit executive in that direction also?
I'm not sure I understand I mean, when you say direct the chief audit executive, who are you talking about directing?
I think the audit review committee, if you establish that underneath the commission, could do that. So, like, let's say the audit committee directed work, they did work function, the internal auditor, Scott, put together an audit finding. It was done through the quality assurance review through the audit committee. They found the audit findings were supported with the work papers. And then they took that to the audit review committee and they looked at the audit that was being produced for the agency. And maybe they felt like Scott and the audit committee overlooked something big, and it lacked the focus of meeting the scope that was originally approved. Then they could then at that point redirect Scott to go back to the audit committee to redo the audit work or to expand the audit itself. And that's going to be something where the board commission can then direct the CAE to relook at the work that they've done themselves that's already been approved by the audit committee. And then Scott would have to come back to the audit committee and say, I had a meeting with the audit review board and have found that even though we went through this, we did the quality assurance review, they believe that we missed a gap in the scope and that it needs to be reevaluated. And that's when the audit committee say, well, yes, you can do that, or no, you can't because you did an advisory engagement, so there you lack independence, and maybe we need to outsource that to an external auditor, et cetera, right? And so that would be how you would govern that function. Does that kind of answer your question about the commission's ability to redirect the auditor's work?
I think so. And it also, the part of the question also was designed to make sure that, or to see if we could formulate both of those levels or both of those committees as reporting to being appointed by and reporting to an individual public official, that being the commission chair, which would.
I don't think that's going to work. That's not going to fly with the.
Yeah, it's not possible under the law. So you can't have the commission appoint the members of the audit committee and have it not be a public committee. The law is pretty clear about that.
I mean, it's pretty clear that that the direct involvement of the commission, I think, in the audit committee, which is not the subcommittee, the audit advisory board we're talking about, but in this committee, I think would prompt the ethics committee to say we must hold public hearings. So the option that I hear being presented is one that would require that the chief audit executive appoint the audit committee, and the audit committee advises only the chief audit executive on, how to conduct the internal audit function, how to on ensuring that it meets audit standards, reviewing and evaluating his work, and so forth. And then the chief audit executive reports to the the chief audit executive reports to the commission through its audit review board, and provides his reports to the executive director, and the executive director responds to audit recommendations that are made. But the audit committee does not itself make recommendations to the commission or to the executive director. The real stumbling block, and I don't know, Jacqueline, whether this is, do you appoint your audit committee?
I do. The way that my charter reads is that I decide who is on my committee, but I must have external member. And that is a requirement of ORS. ORS says that we must have an external member on our audit committee board.
Right.
So it can't be in a bubble, right? It has to have an external member. And then that external member, I give options. So I allow my committee to vote in I will give like 3 or 4 options, and then they'll come and interview, and then I allow my committee to vote on it. And then at the end of the day, I review the votes. They're anonymous, like they don't vote live. And then I decide whether or not that is still a good fit. So I'm the ultimate decision at the end of the day, but I typically like to lean to a more diplomatic approach to make sure that it functions well, right?
Sure.
My audit committee just happens to be the entire exec team, and that's not normal for other ones, but we're military. So I want the input of our federal partners, and I have guests that come, and I want everyone that's at the table so that I don't have to have 10 meetings reiterating the same audit finding. Everyone that's in there understands the audit finding, and they all agree, and they all had the same opportunity to weigh in at the same time. That's how I structure it. I do that for ease of service. That doesn't mean I also sit on the audit committee board, the audit committee for Department of Corrections. They have 2 different ways that they conduct their committee. They have an executive session where they do it, which is the executive members. And then they have an audit committee section that's made up only of external members. So they do both. And so, each to their own, but both are appointed by the CAE at the Department of Corrections. And so that's the way it's structured there.
Okay.
The IA recommends that your audit committee be made up of a majority of your subject matter experts and external members as well that can weigh into how the audit function works. So technically, as president chair of the Chief Audit Executive Council last year is where I was over it. One of the recommendations I had made to all the CAEs across the state is that their external partners, at least one of them be a CAE from another agency, so that you're ensuring the standards be met. And we attempted really well to get at least one CAE serving on one board across the way. So,
thank you. So I think the critical element, I think, in what the Ethics Commission has communicated is that if we want the audit committee to be able to make recommendations to the chief audit executive, then our only option really is, as Jacqueline just described, for the chief audit executive to be the appointing authority of the committee, because the section that we would be seeking to qualify as exempt from the public meetings law is that specific section that provides that a body which is appointed by an individual public official and advises only that public official is exempt from the public meetings law. So if the audit committee is to advise the CAE, it must be appointed by the CAE in order to be exempt from the public meetings law. Rob.
Thanks. I just wanted to say I like the direction this is headed. I think it's going to make the commissioner's time much more useful. We're asking for a lot of, we're all volunteers here, I know, but it's always important to make sure people feel like they're having a good use of your time. And I think it's sort of coincidental, maybe. We're redoing the entire bylaws of governance for the commission. So this actually is a good opportunity to go in there and set up that audit review committee that we talked about, and get a few maybe appropriate people on there. I would probably sit on that committee to start off with, just because of my connection of what's been going on here the last year or so, and make sure we're set up. But I think it's really good. I think I'm not going to restate the reasons, but I think having a private audit committee, whatever you call it, internal, is really good. And so I'm looking forward to some more concrete proposals that I can take to the commission and the governance subcommittee.
Any, Jackson, your
I just
hand
have a
again?
follow-up because this is a public meeting and the public may be viewing this later. There's always that concern that when a CAE gets to appoint their own audit committee, that there's an echo chamber, right? That you're going to have members that just praise and give the CAE everything they want to, and they get a panel of yes, yes, ma'ams, yes, sirs. And I want to just reiterate that all chief audit executives are bound to either yellow book or red book standards. I believe Scott and we both follow the red book standards, which is the IAA, and that has a requirement for how your committee is structured. And then our CAE, which is a CAE council for across the state, we go in ad nauseum with Das, Eli, Richie, about how you should be structuring your audit committee and how you should have external members. And we're constantly checking in to make sure that the audit committees established throughout the state are not echo chambers, that you do have external members. And we do have that requirement of the ORS that an external member is appointed to there, so that is not an echo chamber, for the intent of, reviewing internal audit function. And then going even step further, the IAA standards, the Red Book standards, require audit review. So requires looking at the work papers. And every 5 years, you're required to have an external review of your internal audit function that goes to your audit committee. So it is not easy to establish an echo chamber if you were going to. So even having the CAE be able to appoint their own committee, it's very difficult following the standards to have your own echo chamber regardless. So I just want to reiterate that to the public, that moving to that does not end up being that you just get a team of yes sirs, yes ma'ams.
And just to add to that, this is Scott. I'm doing an EQA for another agency now, bringing in my own view on that work, and I don't know the people there at all. So that's functional. It's happening across the state.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing, and would take a vote in a moment, but what I'm hearing is that this committee sees value in an audit committee being able to function outside of public meetings, and and what that would require, according to the Ethics Commission, is that the audit committee charter be rewritten to provide that the audit committee is appointed by the CAE, an individual public official, to advise only the CAE, and that the um, the internal audit charter it would need to be revised in order to satisfy audit standards, to provide that the chief audit executive has unrestricted access to the executive director and to the commission or its audit review subcommittee, um, and that the chief audit, I think it already provides that the chief audit executive reports functionally to the audit committee and administratively to the executive director. If that is the preference of the committee, and we'll take a vote on that in a moment, then I think Scott and the new chair should present at the next audit committee meeting drafts of revised charters for both the audit committee and the internal audit function, to meet those requirements, and Rob should propose to the commission that, and I'm assuming at the moment that some action would be required by the commission to surrender its current authority, or to create this subcommittee, or it should dismiss the subcommittee or the audit committee as a subcommittee of the commission. I'm not sure, but that would also be required. Maybe the commission's approval of a new audit committee charter would be sufficient to do that.
I think we
Does that
need
sound the right approach, Rob?
Yeah, I think we'll just need to do an amendment to the bylaws that sets this all up.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
like I say, we're working on them now, but even if we can't get all the bylaws approved, I think we can at least do an amendment to that section of it so we can get that moving.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So that's, I'm sorry, David, I see your hand.
And John, I support what you're suggesting. One suggestion I have is if we're going to be discussing a new version of the draft charter at the future meeting, I think maybe it might be prudent to share that draft charter with the Oregon Ethics Commission just to make sure they agree it would do what we envision it would do.
Right. That's what we did with the previous draft of a new charter, and that's
Okay,
when
great.
they said, this would subject you to the public meetings law. So we certainly would plan to do that.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Okay. Given all that, let's take a vote of the committee on whether that is the direction that they would like us to follow. All in favor? Rob, do you have another comment, or are you just voting for it before I? Oh, okay. So let's all in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. think we have everyone, but everyone who's Deanna is still with us.
Yes, yes,
Okay, and is that a vote in favor?
it is.
Okay,
It's my hand.
thank you.
Sorry.
That's all of us. Thank you. We will proceed in that way, and I think we can have those revised documents for the next meeting. Rob, if you feel it's necessary to take something to the board sooner than that, we could call a special meeting. But all right, thank you all. Now moving on to, and we're a little behind now, to the status of the PAE AP report.
Okay, this is Scott. Real quick on that. The final draft was submitted to Ken, and he's assured me he's working to get a formal response back by December 14th. There were 3 findings and 7 recommendations that he's reviewing as risks and building action plans potentially for those. So once that's done, I'll provide those accordingly to the audit committee and to the commission. They have requested summaries, and then also to the chair, they will have the full report. So that's the status. We're essentially waiting for the director now to respond.
Thank you.
Mhm.
That's all. Move to the status of prior audit recommendations.
Okay, real quick on that. Let's see if I can share this real fast. I've made some progress in closing. I don't know if you can see the chart here. Is that viewable?
Can you expand, make it bigger?
Oh.
Thanks.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, this shows just the progression from our prior meetings, the number of outstanding audit recommendations. The progress on this has been slow. There's been a lot happening, but if I go through each of these tabs, you'll see dates. This first one's already done, so I'm going to stick to this next one. If you can see this, this is the date of the planned status update for the internal audit of sole source audit that was done back in 22, I believe. This is about 3 years old. So there's a status update that's due then, February 23rd of 26. And a lot of this then will get more attention. I've given a little bit of a grace period on this as we get our feet under us. We sort of inherited these a little bit, and there's been focus on FCMS and resources needed to do that. But in January and February of next year, the focus will be on getting these behind us because, of course, we're going to have those 7 recommendations from the PAE and AP audit to work as well. So while I did close one this last quarter, the focus is definitely going to be shifting on that next month. I'll just hit these real quick out of interest in time. This is for the Kernet Stokes audit. Again, this is about 3 years old. The pendings are statuses that were due for this meeting that I didn't get, but that's okay. I'm going to follow up with those folks and get an update then. In the same kind of effort being made in January and February to get these closed. Not quickly, they have to be done right, but the effort is going to be to focus on these more. This one has, I think, 6 that are outstanding. If I go to IA of CAP, there are 2. That's for January. The spots card also for January, early in January at that. And then this will include the PAE and AP update at the next meeting. That's really all I have unless there's some questions on specifics.
I have a question. Scott,
Yes.
were any of these considered outstanding and reported to governor's expectation in November?
No, because they were outstanding prior. I think that's just a 1-year look back.
Okay, so none of them needed the governor's expectation for reporting for outstanding audit findings that are not marked as closed or in progress. So none of them were past the date when they originally needed to be completed.
Oh, those were definitely. Yeah, there's a number of
So
these
they
that are
were
plus 3 years
reported
old.
in the audit. So like with the governor's expectation, when you have an audit finding that had an expectation for closure and then they failed to meet that deadline or they failed to offer like a memorandum of record of why they needed an extension, then those get reported to the governor's desk. That was completed in November.
I will have
So
to go
you
back and
had
check because I've checked with Eli to make sure that I'm doing the right reporting. And I
so
think
you
one
had
of
you had 25 open audit findings reported for November for the governor's expectation.
I would have to take a look at that. I think in the last year, it was basically reporting what we had, which was the 1 audit for the PAE and AP. But I will follow up and go back and check my reporting on that. Right now, I don't recall if I did that or not, but I did consult with Eli on these. But
So one of the things that when you restructure your audit committee,
Mhm.
you should be talking about in we should be talking about in October and also in April before those reports go out to the governor's expectation about making and ensuring that those open audit findings have a memorandum of record extending the date of requirement so that they are not ending up on the governor's expectations list as showing as outstanding. Because when they end on that governor's expectation list, essentially what that's communicating to the public is that the agency is aware of an open audit finding and is failing to acknowledge it or work towards it. That's the intent of that audit expectation. And that's why there's the need to have a memo or of some sort of record or a revised report showing that the date has been extended either due to failed resources, lack of employee time, or just the inability to obtain a contract. Like if you have a contract solution to mitigate that risk or fix the audit finding. The things that get reported to the governor's expectation is when an agency fails to do the work and chooses not to acknowledge an open audit finding. And that's when her team can say, why is that agency have an open audit finding that the management doesn't want to fix, right? That's the intent
Excellent.
of a governor
Excellent.
expectation. So going forward, we should really be looking at why these are still open and why there's not like a memo of the date of next expiration, a date of the intent to, close them
To
out.
close them.
And then also, like, if risk is accepted, then that's also a way to close out. So if management says we're aware of the audit finding and yet we can't mitigate it because we don't have the resources or the time, so we're accepting the risk and we're doing other mitigating strategies, then that's also closing an audit finding, right?
And
So
we have some of those that has been the case. But for the
yeah,
report you mentioned, that is definitely, I don't recall
yeah.
that
So
being
we'll
something we've done.
definitely,
So
you shouldn't have for discussion of audit committee, we shouldn't be talking about 25 open audit findings. What you should be talking about is 25 ongoing audit findings that are being resolved, not open and unresolved and management's not addressing. There's a difference in the way of communication. So you and I for like mentorship can talk about that online, offline, but like, yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. You should not, as an agency, and I know that you're new and you guys have gone through a lot. It just does not appeal right to the public to have an audit that's 3 years old and have open audit findings. It's not
understood.
a good look unless you have like for instance, with us, to give you an example, for Oregon Military Department, we had a physical security audit, and this is all public record, where we had an open audit finding, and it lapsed 2 years that it was open, but we had memorandum of fact because we were going through the stage gate process, where we had to go through DAS to get a new contract for a vendor, and then we had a vendor who failed to meet the requirements. We had to start all over again. So that's a good reason for an audit finding to be open, but it's not necessarily unresolved. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? So
it does. And
that's
I think a number
we
of
need
these
to
have been because
address
of,
some of that.
okay. And I think a lot of these have been based on the pending functionality of the FCMS system. But there needs to be a memo, is what I'm hearing. Like that needs to be
Yeah,
documented.
you need
Okay,
to have a
got it.
memorandum of fact of, and that needs to be done at least every 6 months because that's how governor expectation is. So once you have a date, like let's say staff believes that it's going to be resolved and they say, we're going to have it done, it's going to be fixed by January 1st. On January 1st, you should be going to them and saying, or really week before January 1st, you should be asking them, are you on target to meet your January 1st date? If they say no, then you say, I need a memorandum of record showing why you're failing to meet that. And then what's your next expiration, your next management response date of expectation to resolve that audit finding, so
Excellent. I
that you have
appreciate
a
that.
record of that. Yeah, that would be
Excellent.
the way that I would operate in that.
I like those mechanics. We've got about 1 minute left, I think, to vote
Sorry.
you in as, as the chair. Back to you, John. Thank you.
Okay, you're done with your review of prior recommendations?
I am. I
Right.
appreciate the feedback.
So, next is our vote on the new audit committee chair. We have one nomination. All in favor of uh, electing her as the next chair, please indicate by raising your hand. Can you unshare your screen so I can see folks? Thanks. Oh,
I'll even do mine.
thank you. Anna, with us?
I'm sorry. My internet is also kind of in and out today.
Yeah, sure, I understand. But
Thanks.
we're voting on the chair, new chair. Jacqueline is the nominee. Thank you. Uh, and Jacqueline, I think you're entitled to vote if you'd care to, but
I just figured I'd abstain. I don't know about
okay.
voting for myself. Seems
I
kind
think
of.
we have enough votes in favor. Thank you and congratulations.
Yay.
Good job.
All right, last is our, I know we're out of time, but we have our round table. Anyone have anything for the round table?
I
I
just have
just
one
have
little
a
note.
comment. So, oh, sorry, Jacqueline.
I was just going to say thank you for electing me to the position of chair. I just wanted to make the committee aware that I am on intermittent medical leave, and Scott and I talked about this before the nomination went up. There might be times that I will have to be absent unexpectedly. And in that event, I will do my best to coordinate with Scott prior to if I am unable to have a secondary chair, someone to run the meetings. Just FYI.
Thank you. Was there someone else that had a comment?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. My only comment is in reference to Jacqueline's comments around the Kernet Stokes audits from 2022. Scott has been diligently working with all of us with all of those exceptions. And I know there was conversations a while ago around, these were audits done when obviously we were in the judicial branch versus the executive branch, and some of the things didn't need to be reported. And so that can definitely can change. So I'm not arguing reporting, because if we need to report, then we're all for that. But we've had ongoing conversations, and I know Scott and I specifically had some, and I believe with the previous director around the comment, Jacqueline, that you made around acknowledging the risk and let's close some of those audits because of, acknowledging the risk and the time, like FCMS, we're still a year or more out to have FCMS. And those were some of my comments, is like, we're holding these audit exceptions open for a long period of time. Is there a way that we can't close them? So I
You can
guess I
most
just want to
certainly
make sure
just
that we've had,
acknowledge them all, risk accepted, thing in progress, and then you can say that this audit will be used in the development of furthering, and then you can close all the audit recommendations and then just schedule a re-audit when the system is up and running to make sure that they're actually meeting the compliance. So you can close all of them as risk accepted, write a memorandum of fact that it's an ongoing project, and then a new audit will be done to reassess whether or not these audit findings were addressed in the development of the system. Does that
I
make
like that.
sense? And you can
yeah, that,
close the whole thing out as
yeah,
risk accepted, because that's a people don't understand, like, well, I guess I say people, some auditors, chief audit executives don't realize that risk accepted is closing out an audit opening, that you can have a management choose to accept the risks due to the lack of resources available to mitigate the risk or to close an audit finding, right? You can have a risk to be accepted. We realize that the door never locks because we have to prop it open, because we can't lock it because it's a security risk and we've been notated by the fire marshal that we have to have an exit or something like that, right? Like a physical
right.
security audit. So you say, I know that having the door open, does XYZ, we accept that risk because there's another risk that's greater, or there's something that we have to do to address before we can even address that next one. So you can close out an entire audit and say it was untimely because it's an ongoing issue and that it will be readdressed. That's very acceptable.
Very good. We'll
And
be
it's
looking at that real
acceptable as
soon.
long as you have a memorandum of record of why you're doing it.
Yep.
So,
Okay. Good to know.
Perfect. Thank you.
The other items for the committee? If not, I do have one. I looked yesterday at the materials for the for the commission meeting last week. I see the meeting recording is available today. It was not available yesterday, but I did look at the materials and was concerned about one thing that I saw in the comprehensive report from the agency, or from the commission to the legislature, which is something that the commission is required to provide annually to the legislature. In particular, let me see if I can find it here. There is a statement in regard to the internal audit function that, let me see, hold on a moment. In the comprehensive public defense report, it's under the compliance audit and performance section in regard to internal audit, and it states, as of November 1st, 2025, the sole auditor within the agency will shift from an internal agency auditor focused on agency risk to an auditor within CAP performing financial and spot check audits of the agency's payment system. The auditor, which was moved from the executive division back to CAP through HB 5031, will report to the CAP manager with a secondary reporting structure directly to the commissioners and agency audit committee. That seems to be in direct conflict with the actions that this committee has just taken to approve.
Sounds like outside the realm of a CAE. That sounds like an internal auditor function and not just a CAE function. So if you want a CAE cannot do that workload because it's a conflict of interest and it would violate the Red Book standards. So that seems to be pointing more to like a compliance internal auditor position or some sort of nature. That would basically mean that you would have to move forward to abolish the fact that you have an internal auditor. That internal auditor really wouldn't function as an internal auditor anymore. It would be more of a compliance auditor, and you would be auditing only one subset of group, because an internal auditor looks at more than just financial. It looks at processes, internal controls, things like that. So moving an internal auditor to report to something is a huge conflict of interest, or assigning them work and other. Now you've cut off their legs to be able to review that work later as an advisory. So I'm not sure where that came from or where it is situates from, but that's dangerous territory that you'd walk into if you assign your CAE to do other workload. You're going to then cut your legs off. You're going to cut your nose off to spite yourself. You're going to lose that whole ability of the benefit of having internal audit, the public's perception of why internal auditors are needed at agencies, right? The public is the one who, the legislator said that agencies are to have an internal audit function, a chief audit executive function, and that they're supposed to be independent. And if you do that, you cut that whole public need out, and you've paralyzed your auditor to actually
I agree entirely, and I wonder if we could ask Kim to comment on this. I know that Scott had raised a number of issues with you, Kim, regarding this, many of which Jacqueline has just reiterated, and asked for an opportunity to meet with you along with either myself or one of the other CAEs on this committee. But that hasn't happened, perhaps because you've been away on vacation. But I'd appreciate it if you could clarify this. And also, Rob, is Rob still here?
Yep, he's still here.
Yeah, Rob, if you could, as I said, I haven't had the opportunity to review the recording of the meeting, but I assume that since this was submitted for approval by the commission, that the commission probably acted on this.
Yeah, and I actually mentally flagged that as well. We had 500 pages to review, but I mentally flagged that as well. And as I read that, I thought, well, this can't be Scott. This must be that other audit position that was
The
authorized
other
under
position's been
CAP.
eliminated. The other position, there is no other
Yeah, I
position.
know. And when I read it, I thought that it surprised me. And I just, at the time, I flagged it as, oh, it must be that other position. But Kim, is this actually Scott has been changed as of November 1?
Yes, it is. It is the position that Scott holds has been moved under cap as of 11/1.
So,
And you are correct. The other position we had was eliminated.
So
Okay.
Scott
can
and
you
I have
clarify?
had several well, not several. We've probably had two. Um, and I have been working with HR, our deputy director, and also our interim director. And yes, I do owe Scott and others a meeting. And yes, I have been on vacation, so it is on my list. Scott and I have had some pretty, I would say, very candid, good conversations, understanding the direct conflict and also addressing Jacqueline's comment. But we have been directed by the legislature to make this change with his position reporting now under cap, and we'll be doing a lot of internal audit work. Jacqueline, to your comment, compliance work, there is internal audit work around like our contracts, payments to our providers. There's a lot of that internal audit compliance work that needs to happen within CAP. And we have one position to do that work along with our CAE work as well. We're all navigating this. Scott has been graciously very patient with me, and so I just want to acknowledge that and thank him for that. But it is something that we do need to, it's on my to-do list, Scott, to get that meeting set up so we can have really clear guidelines and expectations of what needs to be done. But that is the direction that position, Scott's position, has been moved to. And I hear the concern of this committee. I hear the concern of Chair Harris now on this. And so I will be taking all of those back to work with our deputy director and also our HR manager, because they've all been in the same conversations, not with Scott, but since Scott and I've had conversations, I've gone back to that, to both the director, the deputy, and our HR director as well. So
it seems like from what I just heard Jacqueline and John state, I don't know how we can do an audit charter given the potential for conflicts here until this gets resolved. Because obviously if we have an audit charter, there shouldn't be any conflicts, but yet this produces a conflict. We violated the charter, and therefore what do we do? So it sounds to me like that needs to be resolved before we can even begin work on the new audit charter, I guess. Unless I'm missing something there. Also, this needs to be elevated to the executives, directors level, because this sounds like the legislature asked us to do auditing, right? I mean, look at that budget note. And I don't know, maybe did the contrary thing, this last legislative session. Maybe that changed the budget note. And I heard Ralph, but frankly, I want to honor what the legislature is doing as far as giving us money, and honoring what their expectations are when they fund these different things. And
Yeah, I wonder what their intent was. I mean, because one intent of the legislator is to have a chief audit executive that is independent and meets the standards of IAA, who's reviewing. And there's no need that there's no conflict if they do an advisory engagement of CAP, right? There's no conflict if they do an audit of that. But the conflict is when their everyday work is that consistent workload, then they're no longer independent. They're answering to like that function. That's the intent. There's a lot of chief audit executives, for instance, like the DOJ, has extra auditor position. You have the Justice Department that has auditor, and they have specific internal auditors that are assigned to a specific function, right? You have like an IT auditor, but this chief audit executive itself is an independent function. They may have internal auditors underneath them that do workload that's in, day out, every day, all the time, but the chief audit executive does not. So that's where the conflict kind of is. I mean, you have the Department of Transportation, Marlene's group. They have lots of auditors, and those auditors are assigned to a certain customer. Like their area of focus is that one customer area, right? So they look at those things. Like one auditor may only ever audit contracts and do that work. But it is a conflict for the chief audit executive to have their workload divided, because then you've cut their legs off, basically. But I mean, I know that agencies, I can say, I know that we were given some hard decisions with the 5% cut for budget, the 1%, and then the legislator going back and asking for things, which just kind of just paralyzes agencies. And we have to meet this expectation, but we have these resources, and we have to make the best decision that we can with what we have and what we have. But it just feels like with that change, you're going to have your EQAs show violation in 5 years. When your agency gets reviewed, you're going to have them say that you did it wrong, and that's going to be public record, that you showing that your internal audit function is set up inaccurately. You're going to show your audit committee is going to say you have a conflict constantly. And then you're going to have those hours of Scott's work that's approved to do those audits diminish, because his workload is going to be divided in half, right? So you're going to have to readjust expectations for audits to be concluded, or, or just even advisory engagements, like when he's doing something that's not an audit or advising. And then also that heavy lift of your risk register is never really going to mature, because again, that time period is going to be cut from him ability to mature your risk assessment for your agency. So there's just a whole bunch of, like, you get one benefit and you're meeting the legislature's intent on one side, and then the other, you're handicapping yourself down the road. And then hindsight 2020, you're going to look back and be like, I wish we wouldn't have done that, because now we're handicapped from that area. But I understand the rock and the hard place that budget and legislative intent puts agencies in, right? So it's a hard decision. So I get
it. My concern here as the outgoing chair of the audit committee is that the audit committee has not been consulted in any of this process of reorienting the chief audit executive, changing his reporting structure, and I'm not quite sure what the statement that the sole auditor will shift from an internal agency auditor focused on agency risk to an auditor within CAP performing financial and spot checks. That sounds to me like all of his time is going to be devoted to CAP financial and spot checking, when this audit committee, on which the CAP manager sits, has just approved an audit plan which is fully devoted to work focused on agency risk. I think it's important to get a meeting together with management and the chair of the audit committee to address what appears to be a clear conflict between what management is saying in this report and what management's representatives on the audit committee have just done in approving this audit plan. Similarly, I think we need clarification from the commission, from Rob, if they have approved this report, on what they see as the role of the internal auditor in this agency, and their representative on this committee having just approved an audit plan which clearly involves work focused on agency risk and consumes all of the auditor's time devoted to that function. I mean, there's a clear inconsistency between what we've just done today and what management and the commission are saying in this report. So
At
it's important
minimum,
that as soon
the
as possible.
audit committee should be able to review the independence of the internal audit and make sure there's no conflict of interest in the workload and any future workload, and then have it well documented so that your EQA in the future is not detrimental to you. Meaning that when you have your red book review every 5 years, when they come back and look through your management, it's not just people have this conception that when an EQA is done, it looks just at the internal audit work. It actually looks at the agency on a whole and their ability to mitigate their risk, and the agency on a whole and their decisions regarding internal audit function and how they manage audit findings. That includes internal audit findings and your external auditors that come in and audit. So it's super important that you have a good EQA report, because that is public information. It does go to the JLAC. So you want to make sure that your EQA is on spot, that you are performing your internal audit function according to the IAA standards at the end of the day. Because what I don't want for you guys, and I know that you guys have limited resources, and Scott is, your only resource to meet those requirements is to handicap yourself, like I said, down the road where you're looking back and being like, oh, we have this violation of the standards. It's going to go to JLAC. It's going to make it look like we violated the ORS laws. And we did it all, and in a sense, we did it all trying to meet the other legislative standard, right? So it just kind of sorting through, like, what does that mean? Do you need to have like a special legislative session to ask for more money to get a secondary position appointed for internal auditor if they really do want that audit function? Having to go back to the board and saying, hey, legislator, you really wanted this, but hey, this is how it conflicts. That means you're going to have to give us the funds and mandate the funding to support that role, right? I don't know the steps to that. I'm not a CFO or agency director, but I do know that there are special sessions and things that you can go forth and ask. It has to be a hard place to be in, Kim. I know that management couldn't have made that choice easily. I'm with John. I wish it would have came through the committee so that we could have at least advised how there's some conflicts of interest in the workload being done. So that's it.
Okay. I think we've defined our concerns. And I hope that there'll be an opportunity to meet and discuss it with management. Having said, is there a motion to adjourn?
Oh, so moved.
Second?
I'll second that.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank
you,
you.
John.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.